Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Leon Hartwell. Welcome to our 21st LSE IDEAS Russia-Ukraine Dialogue. We are part funded by PeaceRep, an international research project led by the University of Edinburgh Law School, which delivers research and tracks data on conflict and its resolution. For today's event, we're also partnering with the Polish Cultural Institute in London. Thank you for your support. Given ongoing Russian strikes against critical infrastructure, millions of Ukrainians are starting to struggle to cope with power and heat in freezing temperatures. Ukraine's national grid operators said that it's been forced to impose emergency blackouts across the country after setbacks in repairing energy infrastructure. According to DTEK, Ukraine's largest private electricity producer, the electricity supply for residents of Kiev will be reduced by 60%. Until last year, Russia was Europe's largest provider of coal, oil, and natural gas. The EU imported only about 16% LNG from Russia. This year, in an effort to shift away from Russian energy, European governments have been hard at work to source alternative markets. Those alternatives have not always come cheap. In Prague, nearly 70,000 protesters gathered in early September for the Czech Republic First demonstrations against rising energy prices. The UK, Moldova, Germany, Austria, and Italy have all experienced some form of public frustration as a result of skyrocketing energy prices. Should public discontent escalate, there's a risk that it could impact on Western sanctions against Russia, which by implication will also have a direct bearing on the ongoing war. To discuss the Russia-Ukraine war on energy, I'd like to welcome three distinguished guests. First, I'd like to welcome Dr. Benjamin Schmitt, Senior Fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C., and an associate of the Harvard-Ukraine Research Institute. He also has a range of other affiliations, which I will not mention right now. I'd also like to welcome Guy Monson, a great friend of LSE IDEAS. He is the Chief Investment Officer and Managing Partner of Saracen and Partners. Welcome, Guy. And finally, I hope she will join us soon, the Honorable Jadwiga Emilewicz, member of the Polish Parliament and former Deputy Prime Minister of Poland. Let's start with you, Benjamin. If you could unmute for me, please. Ben, since coming to power, Putin has invested heavily in Russia's energy sector, which eventually allowed him to use oil and gas as political weapons to achieve foreign policy goals. What are your main observations of Russia's energy sector since February, and where do you see the loopholes in terms of the response from transatlantic allies? Thank you, Ben.
Well, thanks, Leon. It's great to be here at LSE IDEAS. I just want to say to start, I'm glad the way that you framed this question, Leon, is that it basically shows that this has been a long-term strategy by the Kremlin, and it really has. Remember, we're talking about an authoritarian nation, which is a command economy that has the ability to bring under its operational purview all the the capacity of state power, and unlike in Western democracies, that includes economic tools, significant economic tools of the state. And so Russia under Vladimir Putin has consolidated and basically projected the ability to weaponize energy and energy dependency in the West for many years. There's been dozens of gas cutoffs, of course, famously in 2009. There was a major gas cutoff of Ukraine that led to significant downstream energy insecurity across the EU, including in Bulgaria and elsewhere, and that really set in motion, and showed just the dramatic extent to which energy security has to be a part of national security and foreign policy development across the European Union. Obviously, in the aftermath of Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine in February, the Russian Federation has been using energy as a weapon all over the place, which I can go through the list here. But I want to step back and show that even in the run-up to the war, right? And so in 2021 in particular, Russia started to not take normal market action to inject gas volumes into its own storages across the EU, storages which state-owned Kremlin-controlled Gazprom had at least a partial or full ownership stake in these facilities. And that created market scarcity on purpose, right? A Kremlin-generated energy crisis in the run-up to the war. And unfortunately, in particular, Berlin, who had agreed with the Biden administration that, quote, should Russia weaponize energy, then it would stop Nord Stream 2, it would implement sanctions and seek sanctions at the EU level. It did not do so. And so again, this final recognition of what energy weaponization is what's going on, unfortunately, has only taken place after this large-scale invasion. And of course, we've seen the Yamal Europe pipeline, gas pipeline, get cut off starting in April. We saw a number of short-term gas cuts in Perk Stream, in the Ukrainian gas transmission network, and then very prominently, the Nord Stream 1 pipeline was cut by 60% owing to supposed technical difficulties with Siemens turbines, according to the Kremlin. Of course, this was debunked by several German expert ministries, including the network regulator, the Bundesnetzagentur. Nevertheless, from June to July, the German government still put pressure on the Canadian government, where these turbines were undergoing refurbishment at a Siemens turbine facility near Montreal, and put pressure on the Canadian government to relent in its own technology export controls, which unfortunately Ottawa did. It went along with Germany's pressure, and again, owing to a false claim by the Kremlin. They'd never needed these turbines, right? And this was again demonstrated when the turbine showed up in Germany, and Olaf Scholz stood famously in front of it, and it basically never even made it to the Russian Federation. And after that, the Russians cut the gas further by 90%. And then, of course, you have the sabotage situation that took place in late September, and now no gas is going through the Nord Stream pipelines. But of course, the one pipeline that was undamaged, the Nord Stream 2 trunk line B, which is under sanctions and not operating because of that, Putin immediately came out and said, well, of course, we could send gas tomorrow through that if only the sanctions would be lifted. So the conclusion here, in my view, is that the Russian Federation under Vladimir Putin is especially using energy weaponization during its conflict in Ukraine because it wants to get other areas of sanctions policy lifted that are very effective. And that means, in this case, technology export controls, which we can, of course, talk about. But that's kind of how I'd like to frame this to start off, Leon.
Thank you, Ben. That's a great way to start the discussion. We're going to go now from Russia to Europe. Guy, you are a numbers man, and welcome back again to the Russia-Ukraine dialogue. I think you're only the second speaker who's joining us for the second time. So I'd like to ask you, what has been the impact of the energy crisis on Europe? And more importantly, how has Europe responded to very high energy prices? Thank you, Guy.
Well, Leon, thank you. And it's a great honor to be back again. I mean, cast your mind back to the 24th of February, the invasion date, and things looked pretty grim. In a matter of months, as Ben outlined, Russian exports dropped from 350 million cubic meters per day down to 30, a 90% reduction. The IMF revised its forecast to project Europe going into a really quite deep recession, led by Germany, predicting just 0.5% growth in 2023. The 18 fleet of French French nuclear reactors, a record number are out of action, turning France into an energy importer. And the numbers looked pretty dire. Gas prices up 200% in the first 4 weeks of the conflict. Fast forward to today, and it's a hugely different picture. And in my view, a little bit of a miracle's taken place. First of all, gas prices are down by 2/3. Energy storage is full, as you've probably seen, to somewhere around 94%. New deals for LNG have been signed with Canada, the US, Qatar, Egypt, and Algeria, and the seaborne fleet of LNG is up 40%. So it's an extraordinary transformation. What enabled this? Well, I think first the EU was very coordinated and ready to move on aggressive purchases, and in Germany's case, and a number of other countries, floating degasification units really fast. So the transformation was extraordinary. I was out in Brussels for the presentation of the energy plan, and the energy and dynamism was extraordinary. Second, they were lucky. To start with, the weather's been relatively mild. Secondly, of course, China has been remarkably slow growing. We've seen Chinese growth drop to just 3%, actually negative in the third quarter. That took enormous pressure off oil and energy prices globally and gave Europe, if you like, a break. Extraordinary oil prices are now 15% lower than they were on the eve of the invasion, and industrial metals prices are 23% lower, which seems hardly credible. Thirdly, they had some economic resilience. Coming out of COVID, Europe had a particularly large savings buffer. The estimate is about €1 trillion. Savings rates during COVID went up from 12 to 19%, giving enormous emergency spending power, if you like, to the consumer. And that really has kept European growth far more robust than expected. We had this IDEW survey out from Germany this morning, the most respected of the consumer surveys. And if you look at the numbers there, it's just possible Germany avoids a recession altogether, which is a dramatically different picture from 6 months ago. So to wrap up, I think it's an extraordinary change. I think some of it's luck, some of it's good fortune in terms of actions taken by the Commission and by individual governments. And in all of this, there's a new unity. I think all of you will agree in the EU. There's almost a rediscovering of the mission of the original EU goals, which has come into the coordinated response. So we're a lot better than I dared dream.
Thank you, Guy. That was actually quite an optimistic overview, which is quite interesting because you don't read about that too much. And you touched upon LNG also, which from my understanding is also down as a result also of fewer demands coming from China. So the interesting question there would be also what's going to happen next year, of course, when China more fully opens up after its COVID restrictions still somewhat in place. But maybe that's something we can address later. Let's turn to the Honorable Jadwiga Emilewicz. Welcome. It's great to see you here. I'd like to ask you, can you provide us with an overview of how the war has impacted the Polish energy sector and what are the resulting effects on Polish society? Thank you, Jadwiga.
Thank you very much for invitation, first of all, and for the running this discussion, which is fundamental, I would say, for the future of the European member state countries, but also the same is true for the Great Britain future, actually, because once we are talking about the energy, we are talking about the prices, the food prices, the whole economy, in fact. So today we are we are trying to translate the energy security to the which is in trouble, a real trouble, into the everyday life. But let me bring some data as well. Thank you for what has been mentioned by my predecessor regarding the purchases, the rapid purchases of the European Union. And in fact, what should be mentioned that after the rapid growth of the gas prices in the half of the year, especially in July and August, today we observed the deep drop down, which is quite optimistic. But what I would like to say that this winter is not going to be the toughest one, because definitely the next one will be even worse than this one. But let me bring some overview of the Polish situation, but also the European one, because it is in a whole discussion which we are having in Poland regarding the Fit for 55 and the coal reduction in the energy sector. We have to see the Polish situation on the broader picture, the European one. So we all are fully aware that the European Union is deeply dependent of the import of the sources, natural energy sources from Russia. Out of Russia, it is 25% of the oil which is imported by the European Union, 45 natural gas, and 44 coal. Well, so quite significant number. If you want to compare it to the Polish situation, we are much deeper dependent in the coal from the import from the Russia. But we have to share this for the household and for the energy sector, which is completely different situation. Whereas we are much less dependent of the natural gas being imported from Russia. Thanks to the diversified policy. And of course, you are fully aware that the Polish approach towards Nord Stream 2 and the general dependency policy, which has been carried by the European Union since 2 decades almost, from the, let's say, cheap natural sources, and being convinced that we are pursuing in the same goal, that I mean the democratic world and the Russian one, and so we can treat each other on the economy level as an even partner. So after 24th of February, I think that nobody really believed in such an issue. So having that in mind and being fully opposed to this project for a long period, and it does not matter whether it is a Law and Justice Party which is in power right now, but even our predecessor were also very skeptical regarding Nord Stream 2 project. So that is why we've been developed both LNG ports, and we growth up 3 times the LNG import, but not after 24th of February, but we did it in the former, we opened the first LNG port in 2018. We are enlarging it right now, and we are going to enlarge the capacity of our LNG terminal, where we import LNG basically from United States. And the second important project, which we completed at the 1st of September, and it started to work the 17th of September, which is Baltic Pipe, so the natural gas from the Nordic shelf, which is importing to Poland through Denmark pipeline. So pipelines constructed together with Denmark. So we are not having a full capacity right now, but the full capacity is going to be there from the beginning of the next year. And the third important point is, once the European countries, and it is generally true for every single member state country, shift themselves to purchases on the spot in a gas market, we were enlarging our containers, gas containers, and so we upgrade the capacity of them. So that is why what has happened in Europe in last year. So when the Europe were almost run out of, so because we know today that Russia has been prepared themselves to the invasion, so that is why they also tried to make this economy war together, and that is why they block and stop export of natural gas to the West Europe. And the containers, which were very small ones, and were almost empty in November, and it was a real huge challenge for the European economy, and which is all the time, because the questions which I heard from the Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, and all those big companies, also the chemical one, is whether we are going to have a natural gas from the very beginning of the next year. So we went in a completely different path. I mean that the capacity of gathering gas and the pipeline and the LNG terminal. So we are less dependent in gas. So the gas is not a problem for the Polish economy, although the prices which were growing up very quickly and rapidly, which are now much more optimistic. But still, LNG, of course, is much more expensive than the natural gas coming from east, for instance. And if you compare and if you think that 70% of the households in Poland are heated by the gas, this is a real challenge for the society. So, and the third source, which is coal, it is also worth to be noticed that the import from Russia to European Union has been grown year by year, and in 2019 it was 56 million ton. And it is, and the Russian coal is stands for 45% of import of the coal to the European Union member state countries. So by the quantity, the biggest importers are Germany, and just after them is Poland. But whereas in Germany, the coal is going to the energy system, in Poland, this imported coal is going to households, still heated. So 50% of households are still heated by the coal. So the all turbulences regarding the implementation of banning Russian coal to Poland, which has been which went into power 3 months earlier than in European Union, was a real tackling, not the industry, not entrepreneurs, but the private houses. And this is the huge problem, because we import 11 million ton year by year from Russia, and we stopped importing in 24th of April. We've got only 2 million, so being imported up to this date. So it was a huge challenge to arrange the new purchases from Australia, Mozambique, so different, and some also from Ukraine, actually. So, and we still don't know, and we are really very thankful, what has been mentioned also before, that this the temperatures are still that we are able to survive. But we do believe that this winter is not going to be very, very, very tough. So, just to sum up, we are deeply dependent from Russian coal in a private households, not in the industry. We reduce our dependency strongly in a gas. We are dependent strongly in oil, but what occurred after the huge merger between the biggest merger on Polish market between two oil companies, and then their agreement signed with Saudi Aramco, that also grows the import from that direction. So it is also quite good momentum that has been chosen for this merger and the new contracts established by them. So just worth to be mentioned that if we think about Polish dependency, which is in one sources by reaching 60%, in another one, like for coal, 40 in natural gas, around 45 in oil. If you think about Lithuania, for instance, which is dependent like 96%, so if we think about the consequences of this war for the states like Lithuania, so we have to bear it in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Jadwiga. I think that's also a great overview of what's happening in Poland and the measures that you've taken to make a number of changes to diversify your energy sector. Let's go back to the heart of the conflict. Ben, I'd like to ask you, Russia is currently heavily targeting Ukraine's energy sector. And there are, of course, also major concerns that some of its nuclear facilities are also at risk. What are your main observations of Russian attacks on Ukraine's critical infrastructure, especially the energy sector, and what are the main impacts? Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Leon. This is an incredibly grave situation that we're seeing unfold in Ukraine right now. Obviously, We're seeing an unprecedented level of energy insecurity being manufactured by another country since the Second World War in Europe. That is the reality of what's going on here. Certainly, since the start of the conflict, Russia has basically shown its level of depravity by targeting civilians and targeting civilian infrastructure. But its latest campaign over the past 6 weeks or so has very clearly turned to a much larger industrial scale of destruction of Ukrainian critical infrastructure. And remember, when we're talking about energy security, energy undergirds all of the other critical infrastructure. So it's not just that Ukraine is energy insecure as it gets towards wintertime, which is a huge concern in terms of the potential for massive humanitarian catastrophe. But at the same time, all other critical infrastructure, whether it be things like transportation or healthcare, those are all incredibly targeted by this as well. And so all of these infrastructure are needed for well-functioning society, and Russia has decided that it can't prosecute its war successfully on the battlefield, and therefore it will take this out and try to create energy pressure across the country. What needs to be done is, I keep getting this question, Leon, what's the biggest energy security plan for Ukraine right now? And frankly, it's more air defense. It's not really even an energy security question in the sense of security of supply. It's physical infrastructure protection, which is one of the pillars of energy security that I've long talked about, but has often been overlooked in the EU strategies, given the significant focus, and I think rightfully so, in a non-conflict scenario of security of supply by diversification of infrastructure and anti-monopoly regulations like the Third Energy Package. So that's all well and good. We need, as the West, to give more critical infrastructure protection to the Ukrainians, air defense, other hardening of critical energy infrastructure as quickly as possible. That has to happen. There also has to be a massive wartime level of effort, just like we're doing on weapons supplies to Ukraine, to make sure that the critical hardware elements of the electricity grid infrastructure, of oil and gas production, all of these sort of things that Ukrainians are being targeted by the Russians right now and need to replace, that those are already in the supply chain. Remember, these are not for the for the large extent off-the-shelf components. These are things that need a longer-term supply chain and a longer-term project development cost. And we need to increase the level of protection so that with air defense and with other measures that can be done to make sure that those heroic frontline workers that are replacing and fixing this infrastructure to support energy resiliency in Ukraine right now can do so safely, and so that the Russians aren't just simply coming back a few days afterwards after it's been basically destroying a piece of energy infrastructure, let's say a transformer. The crew goes out and fixes it, and 2 days later it's destroyed again. This can't happen, right? So we need to have this integrated approach. And in a lot of measures, including sanctions, including this oil price cap, including the oil embargo that the EU is going to have in place next week, need to be part of the response package to make it clear that this sort of what I would say the pinnacle of energy weaponization, which is literally targeting by kinetic means the energy infrastructure of another nation, in this case Ukraine, to create massive humanitarian catastrophe, that cannot go unanswered. And so I'm happy to talk about that in my next intervention as well.
Thank you, Ben, for the reminder that, of course, this energy crisis, which is induced by the Russian military, also requires a military response, but also a very much a holistic response. Everything from greater air defenses, support for Ukraine also, and through energy infrastructure, of course, and then to looking at how we can tighten up sanctions also. Let's turn to Guy again. Guy, let's zoom out again from the conflict and look at the situation globally. Globally, what has been the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on energy? What do you see there? Thank you.
Well, let's begin with the US, the largest economy. Of course, the move in natural gas prices has been much more muted. At the point where European gas prices were up 200%, US gas prices, by contrast, were up 45%. Today, since the outbreak of war, they're pretty well flat. So a very different underlying picture. The second thing I think that's been important in the US is obviously we had an inflation pulse through the world from these food, energy, and electricity costs around the world. That has remained reasonably well anchored in terms of inflation expectations. And what's interesting, although headline inflation have been up over 8% in the US, over 11% in Europe, actually the 3-year inflation forecasts in terms of investor expectations has remained anchored at about 3.2, 3.3%. So unlike the 1970s, this hasn't broken out to the upside. So my thought is that probably interest rates somewhere around the 5% target in the US, probably a little lower here in the UK, 4.5%, will probably be enough to bring us back close to target in 23-24. So it's an unpleasant situation, but it is not a 70s style energy inflation wage spiral, which we saw back then, triggered initially, of course, by the first oil shock in 73. Looking to the second largest economy, China, of course, energy has been a major factor. They've also had water shortages in their own hydro schemes, etc. But of course, it's been dominated by the COVID outlook and a particularly dire situation in their construction industry with multiple bankruptcies and what's beginning to look like a Japanese-style property outcome. That means that the economy has been growing much lower than expectations. We had a number of 6% for 2021 as they came out of COVID. We'll be lucky to get 3% in 2022. Q3 was actually negative, which is just extraordinary for China. Retail sales were down 2.5%. So they're running really to their own agenda, and energy is an issue, but much more important is COVID reopening. As I indicated in my announcement, of course, it's incredibly lucky that China has been growing as slowly as it has. It's kept the pressure off industrial metals, off gas, and off oil in particular, all of which are gas and oil and industrial metals, which are down since the outlook of the crisis. So yes, it's a shock. Yes, it's caused a lot of pain. If we move to the emerging world, I think the shock is much more material in Africa and some of the poor economies, where, to be honest, the EU, quite understandably, with their checkbook out to secure LNG supplies, have squeezed out a lot of weaker players in the LNG market. And of course, they've also had the secondary shock of food prices. But if you look to the second largest EM economy, India, again, they've diversified relatively well. They've had a big push into solar. So the shock is clearly there. It's part of the inflation story. It's part of the high numbers we're seeing in 2022 and into 23, but it hasn't yet embedded itself into the inflationary cycle as, say, the first 2 oil shocks did. So I'm quite optimistic that actually, if we can stabilize energy prices from here going forward, inflation comes down quite fast.
Thank you, Guy. And there's, of course, a lot of nuance also in what is happening around the world. There are quite a few African countries, for example, benefiting from rising prices, and some Western countries have diversified their energy sources further south. But then there are others also experiencing extreme crises as a result of the ongoing energy crisis, and so it's quite a complex situation. Let's turn to Jadwiga again. I know we've touched on some of these issues, but perhaps you can expand on this. How has the Polish government reacted to the energy crisis at the national level, and how does this correspond to the directives coming from the EU? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. Yes, indeed, I have mentioned several issues before, but what should be stressed once again? So we, as the first government, pay a strong attention towards and made a political decision, which was very tough for Poland, which was implementing the total ban for the import coal and gas and oil from the very beginning. So what I mentioned, it was the 24th of March when the parliament has adopted it, and then 2 weeks later, President has signed the regulation. So it was very political and very tough for the economic decision. So, and just afterwards, what I has mentioned, we started to discuss, and actually I was supporting the person who supported the Prime Minister in the Chancellery, trying to negotiate the special contracts for the coal for the Ukraine, and mutually for Poland as well. So we've been able to do it quite fast from Australia, then from Colombia and Mozambique. And what was very, very difficult, because the quality of the coal shipping through sea is much lower than the one which we used to utilize before. So yes, we did it. And if you ask me very detailed question how it works, so we are still trying to do it. We implemented, like 3 weeks ago, we implemented special, because if you have you have to imagine that we used to import the coal from the Russia. So we are having those broad lines from Russia, which are reaching Polish stations. And the redistribution through Poland goes from this direction. Now you are importing it and you are going to Rotterdam or to the Gdańsk, or so to the port. And you have to turn this whole distribution, those 11 million ton of coal, put not from train, but from the port, which is much tougher. And this is a very, logistically, from this point of view, it is a very tough and difficult issue. So we are still changing and managing the situation. So as I mentioned, we signed the regulatory framework to ask the local government to assist us in spreading coal through whole Poland, and the process has started from last Friday. So we are really doing it right now. So this is one point. The second, what I mentioned is Baltic Pipe, which starts working the 17th of September, and up to the full capacity from the beginning of the next year. And this is and a new diversification for oil import to Poland. But what is necessary to be mentioned, that we also, because as it has been in your question to my predecessors, and this last attack to Ukraine, which is not only to the civilian, not only to the states, but basically to this critical infrastructure, it was something that was expected by the government, the Ukrainian government. We started the discussion about that in July, and it was a general will expressed by the government, by the Prime Minister, Minister of Economy as well, that what I asking for us, Poland and the Western countries, is to provide the mobile accumulator that could be delivered to Kharkiv and other cities, because it was exactly what they expect is going to be done in autumn. And it is worth to be mentioned that Poland is the country who is supporting, like the second biggest support is going from Poland to Ukraine from the very beginning, but not only refugees, which the great impact of the refugee for the Polish society, and the good impact, of course. And we were able to deal with 2 million people which are standing in Poland right now from Ukraine. And we do really expect another wave after the bombing this critical infrastructure. So also we are supporting Ukraine with the issues which are the water pump and the energy accumulator, mobile energy accumulator. We are doing purchases in Poland, but also in United Kingdom, and sending it to Ukraine. So, but well, coming back to the question, to this impact and how we try to deal with, is I would say what we implement. The purchases was what I mentioned. The second point is how to reduce this impact for the society. We adopt this anti-inflation shield, which means because the inflation in Poland right now is 18%, so it is the highest. If we think about this transition period, so if we start from 1989, it is the highest since 1994. So this is a big issue, of course, for this life standard in Poland. So that is why we accepted the anti-inflation shield, which means the zero VAT or 7% VAT for zero for food, everything, and 7% for gas, which is now in question by the Commission. So we are not going to prolong it any longer for the next year. Because we are trying then to implement the regulation mutually to that one accepted by several other European member state countries. So we are trying to put the taxation for the, let's say, unpredicted income for the energy production companies. So which is a really growth in Poland, especially we've got a very tough situation in July, August and September, because the energy producers has counted the price based on ARA index. So that means that the coal coming and the sources from ARA market, which is completely fake for the Polish market, because Polish energy producers possess their own coal mines, which are used, and they import less than 1% of coal for the energy production. So we introduced the regulatory framework to simply to tell them and to put the Polish coal index, which refer to the Polish coal mines. So this is something which is similar to the Commission regulatory framework, and that is we also started to grant those who buy coal and gas for the heating houses with the 2,000 Polish zlotych, which is 500 euro per household for simply for this winter time for purchasing coal. So that is I would say that those are regulatory framework which we introduced from the beginning of the energy crisis, and in this first part of my expression, all these purchases that has been done by state to be able to provide energy sources to the economy.
Thank you, Jadwiga, and also thank you for alluding to the very close relationship, of course, between Ukraine and Poland, and because Poland is very much a frontline state, your role in relation to what's happening in this war is also extremely important. For our audience members, as a reminder, Poland, I think, was the #3 donor to Ukraine in terms of percentage of GDP between February and October this year. So thank you for that. Ben, let's go back to you. I'm going to ask you 2 sets of questions, and feel free to spend whatever time you want on or more on one or the other. I don't know, whatever you choose. But for the last few years, NATO increasingly recognized energy as pivotal to security. And with time, the discussion on energy security also included references to hybrid threats. In the context of Putin's February escalation, what are the main lessons that you have learned about energy security? And if I can ask you just on the sideline, also one of our audience members asked you, Grant, from London. There's a campaign that started to spread Russian narrative on disruption of the Baltic gas pipelines. It will probably intensify if the Swedes publish their report. What impact will these social media campaigns have, and what can be done to counter them? Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Leon, and thanks, Ewan. So I'll start by addressing the audience question. It was pretty clear what was going on almost immediately after the first reports came out of a massive methane leak being detected around Nord Streams 1 and 2 over the about 17-hour period at the end of the last week in September. And the reason I say that is there was a very quick and very vociferous and widespread disinformation campaign that very clearly was some sort of Russian bot network or Russian disinformation campaign, in which a lot of accounts in that I would say generally fit that classification on Twitter suddenly all had the same clip ready to go of a press conference in early February, where President Biden was standing in the White House next to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and was asked a question on, how will you stop Nord Stream 2 if Russia is to, further invade Ukraine? And the context of that question was with respect to energy sanctions. In context, just about a week or two before that, the U.S. Senate, on a majority basis, had voted to basically make sure that sanctions would be deployed on Nord Stream 2, putting pressure on the White House to act. And so that was what the question was being asked by a reporter from Deutsche Welle. At least that was the context of it. And of course, President Biden's response was, we will find a way to do this. We will make sure that it's stopped. Basically the accounts that tweeted it out truncated that, right? Truncated the context and just said, basically left the question open. Well, what could President Biden have been alluding to? Well, certainly it must be some sort of kinetic act, which is absolutely ludicrous. The idea that the United States, that has supported Europe's energy security for decades and has been concerned about critical infrastructure protection in Europe and in the US and the transatlantic community writ large for decades, would somehow jettison that, especially the Biden administration, which was originally reticent to even use sanctions to intervene to stop the threat of Nord Stream 2, would suddenly take a random and highly escalatory kinetic action, is ludicrous. But of course, the disinformation sphere pumped that up, because without context, that was an easy low-hanging fruit sort of argument to make, fact-free. And of course, I had a personal impact of that on me, because I was actually on Deutsche Welle's reaction program on the day with Brent Goff, talking about that conference and the press conference and that exact intervention. So we need to make sure that we continue to be resilient. I think that Russia, there's been a few reports. EU versus Disinfo did a great piece, I think in early October, basically, which showed that the progression of the Nord Stream sabotage disinformation campaigns and that of MH17, the airline, downing from 2014, basically took the same sort of playbook in trying to undermine the actual investigation. Leon, can you remind me of the first question? I'm sorry.
No problem. On the first question, it relates to NATO and energy security.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So NATO certainly has recognized, especially in the past decade, that energy security is a part of national security and part of the collective defense of the alliance. Part of the problem that we've had is that there's been a number of NATO member states that have tried to make those issues separate, because clearly projects like Nord Stream 2, projects like Turk Stream, et cetera, allow for openings for hybrid threats from the Russian Federation, not only in terms of energy dependency, but critical infrastructure interference. And of course, we're seeing that right now, play out in real time with what I'm calling, underwater mayhem, or the high seas mayhem that's been going on over the course of the past several weeks, a couple of months, in which there's a lot of press reporting about potential Russian intelligence ships that are seen in Norwegian waters near a critical energy infrastructure, that are seen near Bornholm, that are seen near cables. There's been a number of subsea electricity and telecommunication cables that have been damaged suddenly, under unexplained circumstances thus far. But again, these sort of things need to be part of our national security strategy. So that has to be part of it. At the same time, I just want to make sure we come back to the big decision that's coming up that's going to impact the US, the G7, NATO, the EU, Australia, et cetera. All of these nations that are part of these, it's not obviously a NATO decision, it's a G7, EU, Australia decision, but this oil price cap, incredibly important that we get this right. If the oil price cap, so right now, Russian Urals are trading at a discount and have been since the start of the war, because some traders have tried to stay away from trading in that grade of Russian crude oil. But because of that, the discount is setting the price at around 63, 64, 65, depending on the day, dollars per barrel. And right now, the discussion is let's create this oil price cap so that to the greatest extent possible, even as oil continues to flow into the international global energy market from Russia, at least Russia won't make as much and will be curtailed in its revenues that it makes off this. The problem is right now the G7 and the EU and some member states of the EU are debating having that price cap set to $65 to $70 per barrel. That's actually above what it's being traded at right now. And I got to say, given Jadwiga's comments and the fact that we've been focused on Polish policy, Poland has publicly come out and called for a much deeper cut. If we're going to do this, I think that needs to be really considered strongly, because right now the marginal cost of production is about $20 a barrel, and Poland's calling for about 30 as the price cap level. That might actually work, but only if it's cut at a significant level, at the price cap level, and then enforced on a global basis, right? And there's all sorts of loopholes in technology, tracking, et cetera, satellite technologies, to make sure that illicit high seas trade is tracked and enforced. And we need to have a global effort for this. This is an unprecedented scale of sanctions implementation, and you need to do both things. You need to set the price cap as low as possible and enforce it to the greatest extent possible to raise costs on the Kremlin.
Thank you, Ben, and I'm gonna circle back soon also to Jadwiga to also piggyback on what you said there with regards to Poland. But let me turn to Guy first. Guy, take us again to the broader discussion on energy. Has there been an accelerated energy transition to green energy in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war? And what are your main takeaways from COP27 related to energy and the war? Thank you, Guy.
Leon, thank you. Can I just very quickly, before answering that, just refer to that question that's on the line about the UK energy price?
Sure, please.
To be clear to others, there's a question about how could I be talking about energy prices having moderated when the price cap here has risen so fast? Just to give you the numbers, first of all, I was quoting a 45% increase in the UK December gas futures contracts since the outbreak of war. Remember that it rose quite sharply into the run-up to war. So for the year to date, gas prices are up 92%. However, back in August, at the peak in prices, they were up 350%. So my message is not that energy prices have moderated anything to like where they were before. I'm just saying the spike in August has been very successfully reversed, or at least 2/3 of it, just to make that point clear. In terms of energy transition, I think everybody's got their own views of COP27. Ours here were that the targets to reach where we need to be by 2030 for a 2% warmer world are still hugely ambitious. The carbon tracker report out from the conference suggested that we need to come down from 52 gigatons of carbon dioxide emissions to 27. To put that in perspective, the current commitments would take us down from 57 to just 53. So we got another 22 or so to go. So I think the general impression was a lot of warm words, but some very ambitious gains need to be made, and quickly, because these targets are just 8 years out. In terms of what the Russia-Ukraine situation means for emissions, I think it's complicated, but just a few thoughts that might be useful. First of all, the long-term ambition of decarbonization in the Eurozone economies must also coincide nicely with the idea of European energy security. So the two fit together nicely. So the long-term trajectory of an accelerated plan, which is what COP27 is trying to call for, is also good for energy security. I think that makes obvious sense. The problem is that in the short term, the seaborne LNG emissions lift those carbon emissions quite aggressively. Carbon Tracker did a rough estimate of the results from the European LNG purchases and suggested that would push up Europe's emissions by 1.9 gigatons, so quite meaningfully. So in other words, substituting Russian gas for European renewables would be the dream situation. That, of course, is not possible on the time frame we have, so we have to substitute LNG for LNG, so we lose some potential savings. But overall, and I think this is a fundamental weakness of the Russian strategy, and I'd be very interested in what the other speakers thought. To an extent, by restricting supplies, you are pushing on an open door, and that open door is energy security through renewables, which is the long-term goal of the Commission. So I think if we look 5 to 10 years from now, I think the argument will be that the call to arms over the Ukrainian invasion was also a call to arms for emissions targeting and a more aggressive climate agenda.
Thank you, Guy. Thanks. Those are great insights also. And Jadwiga, I welcome you to comment on both what Guy said and also previously, what Ben mentioned. You, of course, have great insights due to a variety of positions that you've held from government minister to deputy prime minister, and of course the important role that you've played in Poland also on the discussion related to green energy. But let me also ask you a question also while we're at it. The Polish government has confirmed that it needs to revise the schedule of shutting down all coal mines by 2049. Now, as the president of the parliamentary team on zero emissions economy and the European Green Deal, what will this strategy mean in the medium to long term for Poland in environmental, economic, and political terms? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. I would like to start answering for this question, coming back to what Guy has mentioned. I mean that, which is obviously the targets of the decarbonization goal in Europe, which are obviously impossible to be reached. Yeah, so this is the notion which you can hardly listen to in Brussels, being in Brussels. Well, what is important from my perspective? Yes, that's true. Not only as a leader of the parliamentary team focused on Green Deal, but also someone who introduced several legislations which support, for instance, prosumers in Poland, so PV for the private market, and also someone who was responsible for the onshore regulatory framework, which I do believe is going to be pursued by the parliament in the next 2 weeks. What should be, if we are talking about the energy and the CO2 emission targets in the next 2 decades, it is worth to be mentioned, and it is worth to be understand the energy mix which is in Poland right now. So we have to, the current shape of the Polish energy mix is that 48% energy comes from hard coal combustion, 70% energy, 17% energy from burning lignite, 25% RES without division into sources, 6% is natural gas, 3% pump storage power plants, and about 1%, so all the other sources, for instance, industrial power plants. And if you think about, so the coal in general is 65%. So if you think about the path of reduction, you have to treat the Polish case really as a unique one, because it is not very easy to reduce to reduce it in the same speed as the Western countries, as for instance France, 73% energy produced out of the nuclear power plants, or Denmark, where more than 80% is coming from offshore. So what is our, and in general, my perspective is that the war is not, we are not saying that we are stopping the transition. I would say that we are even speeding it up, but in a different path. So what has been accepted before the outbreak of the war in Europe, where every single person said that the gas, natural gas, is a transition fuel, is not going to be true any longer right now. And that is why Commissioner Timmermans in March said that we have to prolong the activity of the coal energy plants, because we cannot do anything else. So I would say that we have to change and we have to diversify, and we are doing that. So the announcement from the market in Poland and from the parliament as well is that we adopted, after a long period of discussion, the special law dedicated to offshore. And the first offshore plants are going to be developed. We've got the first contracts settled between the Polish companies and the technology delivers, the Denmark and the Canadian one. And we are going to have the offshore wind and the offshore energy in 2025 or 27, as far as I remember. So we also speed up process of localization and selection of the partners in nuclear power plant. We've got a big letter of intent settled for the conventional big nuclear power plant being settled nearby the Baltic Sea. And we've got also the activity of two private companies just signed agreements, with one of them with Canadian partner and the second one with the Korean one, for so-called SMR, so the small high temperature reactors. Of course, the process of investment in nuclear is much longer than any other one, but still this process has started in Poland last month simply. So, and the third point and the third issue is what I mentioned at the beginning, is the change in the onshore regulatory, because at the very beginning of our government, it was 2016, we adopted regulatory framework which stopped investment in onshore. It was the reaction for the ban, for the strikes and the social struggles with the investors who were able to build the mill even 80 meters far from the household. So that it was the answer for this, let's say, uneven situation between the investor and the local society. And we are now having the regulatory framework, which led to in a very brief, to make it very brief, to settle the wind farm not closer than 500 meters to the households. And after the double local consultation process. So I do really believe, because it is one of the milestones that should be adopted by Poland before sending the invoice to the Commission for the reconstruction fund. So I do believe that we adopt these changes up to the end of this year. And if you ask me about the regulatory framework, I would say that those are the milestones. The last one should be dedicated to the nuclear power plant, because they would need some special amendments. As you probably know, in Poland we do have nothing despite the laboratory one reactor. So we are starting from the scratch. And of course, in the Great Britain, the Hinkley Point project is well known and how difficult it is. So I do believe that we are going to have this lesson be learned in Poland as well. So so that is why we are going to do both the proper regulatory framework, but also to start the investment process as soon as possible.
Thank you, Jadwiga. I think those are great insights also. I think if there's one thing that this discussion emphasized, by all three speakers, is the important impact of this conflict on energy for Ukraine, for Russia, but also for the globe. I'd like to thank all three of our panelists for sharing your expertise with us, and I apologize, but Ben had to drop off, unfortunately. But thank you to Ben, Guy, and Jadwiga for wonderful insights. Perhaps we can have a similar discussion in the near future, because it seems like this particular issue is quite dynamic. I'd also like to again thank PeaceRep as well as the Polish Cultural Institute in London for your support for the event. Thank you for our audience for tuning in, and please register for our next LSE IDEAS Russia-Ukraine Dialogue, which will focus on Black Sea security. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for arranging the meeting. Bye.
Bye.